Techno.
I believe that techno is one of the most important genres in electronic music. I also think it's maybe one of the most misunderstood. If you ask somebody who listens to electronic music in passing what techno is, their response is going to be completely different from the answer of somebody who DJs or produces one of its many, many subgenres. Maybe that's why it's so misunderstood. Since its inception in 1980s Detroit, it's undergone so many splits and shifts that certain subgenres of techno are unrecognizable compared to others. But in its diversity, I think lies its strength. It's a testament to the transformative power of music. And make no mistake, in all its forms, techno is powerful. From surreal electro-afro cyberfunk to brain-melting minimal to apocalyptic storming warehouse beats to chill, atmospheric, ambient tribal techno, it is meant to be felt through every cell of your body. I wanted to make this video not only to share the history and diversity of techno music with you, but also to educate myself. I went into this knowing the tip of the iceberg when it came to this genre, and now I feel like I have a better understanding and respect for this type of music. So, if you're ready, I'd like to take you back to Detroit in the 1980s, introduce you to techno roots, and then across the world over the next 4 decades as techno morphed and grew into what it is today. This is the history of techno. To understand why Detroit became such fertile soil for techno music, we have to understand the rise and unfortunate fall of the city. Detroit was once a shining jewel of American industry. Henry Ford created the assembly line in his Highland Park plant in 1910, which just was the beginning of the city's dominance and flourishment under the automobile industry. During World War I, Ford started hiring African Americans to work at his plants to close the labor shortage, and the combination of good work and relatively high pay led to a massive population boom in the city. Post-World War II saw high levels of prosperity as the auto industry had its most profitable quarter century. Through a combination of housing policies and transportation planning choices, Detroit was largely segregated racially in and around the 1960s. Wealthier whites who could obtain home loans lived in the suburbs, and the working blacks lived in inner-city communities. Around this time, the auto industry was undergoing a shift as General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler started buying up all the smaller automobile manufacturers. As the Big Three consolidated, they also decentralized away from Detroit, moving the manufacturing jobs away from the city where hard-fought union battles for high wages had made business less prosperous. Between 1945 and 1957, the Big Three built 25 new manufacturing plants in the metropolitan area, and none of them in the city itself. As the remaining plants shut down, so did the businesses that catered to their workers. This process was cumulative, setting an economic shock across the city that would only get worse as the leadership of Detroit failed to diversify the city's industry beyond the automotive industry. Racial tensions in Detroit were high. Racially motivated sabotaging of housing opportunities for blacks and other complex factors led to multiple large-scale riots, including the Detroit Race Riot of 1943, which took federal troops 3 days to get under control, and the 1967 riots, which lasted for 5 days and claimed the lives of 43 people. Hundreds were injured, over 2,000 stores were looted or burned, almost 400 families were rendered homeless or displaced, and over 400 buildings were burned or damaged enough to be demolished. With compounding economic insecurity, constant racial and economic tensions, and a steady outflow of businesses, Detroit was in a great deal of pain. A shell of its former self, it became notorious for violent crime, empty buildings, and crumbling warehouses. However, it's within this bleak frame of urban decay that gave rise and nurtured the flame of one of the most important genres of electronic music ever created. And just, this is Editor Jeremy, just as an aside, I'm not joking when I say it's one of the most important genres of electronic music. Techno and house are like the mother genres of electronic music. It's crazy. They gave rise to like everything else. Anyways, let's get back to the history. Belleville is a suburb of Detroit, located about 30 miles southwest of the city's downtown. In the 1980s, 3 school friends would meet up and become the creators of techno's original sound. They were Juan Atkins, Derek May, and Kevin Saunderson, also known as the Belleville Three. Juan Atkins and Derek May met first in 1981 when they were students at Belleville High School. Atkins was already experimenting with drum machines and synthesizers inspired by bands like Kraftwerk. Juan was the son of a music producer and is widely regarded as the teacher or initiator of the group. He and Derek started trading mixtapes, which included some of their early inspirations, such as Kraftwerk, Gary Newman, and Parliament. From there, they eventually formed a DJ collective called Deep Space Soundworks and started DJing at high school parties. Later, Kevin Saunderson would join the group with a shared love of music, especially the eclectic mix of soul, funky new wave, hip-hop, and rock being spun on the radio by DJ The Electrifying Mojo. Atkins had been a musical kid, playing guitar in bands and convincing his grandma to buy him a Korg MS-10 at the age of 15. He bought his own Pro 1 a little later. Reading the book Future Shock by Alvin Toffler led him to think about escape from what Toffler called an inevitable super-industrial society. Toffler argued that an accelerated rate of technological and social change leaves people disconnected and suffering from, quote, shattering stress and disorientation, or future shocked. Surrounded by the urban decay of Detroit, I can imagine that Atkins already felt that stress and disorientation, and it led him to experiment with creating music inspired by a vision far removed from the crumbling Motor City around him. Deep Space Soundworks started DJing Detroit's party circuit, and by 1991, The Electrifying Mojo was playing the mixes recorded by the trio. They also traveled to Chicago to investigate the house music scene there, which had emerged from the disco scene before it. This influence also got folded into the sound the Belleville Three started experimenting with. Funk, soul, and disco had always had a place in Detroit, and Atkins started channeling that energy into drum machines and synthesizers. One of the first singles from this period is Atkins' Alley of Your Mind, released by Juan Atkins and Rick Davis in 1981. This was under the group name Cybotron. Atkins had met Rick at Washtenaw Community College, and the two went on to release tracks together as Cybotron and separately, with Rick releasing under alias 3070. The two subsequently signed to a label and then split, leaving Atkins to release tracks as Model 500 on his label Metroplex. In 1985, Atkins as Model 500 would release the groundbreaking track No UFOs. Up-tempo, funky, confident, banging, heavy on percussion and repetition with a huge bass line and unrelenting vibe, this track is considered by many to be one of the earliest pure techno recordings. This track is also responsible for helping launch the Detroit techno sound from obscurity into the public consciousness. While most early Detroit techno used science fiction imagery to articulate their vision of a transformed society, Derek May offered up an explosive alternative in 1987 with the track Strings of Life, under his artist name Rhythm is Rhythm, with collaborator Michael James. A now classic-sounding, uplifting house piano groove is punctuated by a galloping beat and soaring string riffs. The piano groove was based on a piano sequence by James, who had been working on a piano ballad, and played the riff into May's sequencer. May took portions of the riff, chopped it up, and added the rest. This track exploded, and not just in Detroit. It hugely hit Britain during the country's 1987-1988 house explosion. Detroit techno had just gone international in a big way. The city that had burned and crumbled gave way to a new vision of the future. The soul of funk and disco transmuted through drum machines and sequencers and a gleaming Afro-futuristic sentimentality into a sound that was ready to take the world by storm. Before we jump across the pond, let's talk about the word techno. Where did it come from? According to one source, it was Juan Atkins himself who coined the term when he released the track Techno City as Cybotron in 1984. I really like the way John Savage talks about this track in his article for The Guardian.
It begins with a brief synthesized fanfare. Then comes the rhythm, choppy, insistent, and clunky. A soulful solo vocal extemporizes, before the hook comes in, Techno City. A Detroit radio announcer robotically states, the time is 6:57 a.m., sampled, sped up, slowed down and cut up. His voice will repeat on and off throughout the next 6 minutes. The mood is straight out of Yevgeny Zamyatin's dystopian novel, You Wake Up, one of millions in the cold, regimented Technopolis. Or you could just as easily be seeing in the dawn after an all-nighter, or at an insomniac/stoned night drive. The first verse doesn't kick in for 2 minutes, and it's simple. Techno City. Hope you enjoy your stay. Welcome to Techno City. You will never want to go away. You can look at the state of the city as a plus, Atkins told me in 1993. When the new technology came in, Detroit collapsed as an industrial city, but Detroit is Techno City. We're at the forefront here. The idea was that a person could be born and raised in Techno City, the workers' city, but what he wanted to do was work his way to the Cyberdrome where artists and intellectuals reside. There would be no Moloch, but all sorts of diversions, games, electronic instruments. Techno City was the equivalent of the ghetto in Detroit, which is overlooked by the Renaissance Tower.
I love these quotes because it distills the essence of the inspiration for techno music as it formed in Detroit. Motor City had to die so Techno City could live. While rooted in Detroit's underground, techno exploded in popularity across Europe in the late 80s and early 90s. The success of Chicago house music paved the way for techno to find a devoted audience. House music took root in Europe, especially in Italy, the UK, and Ibiza, creating an audience and infrastructure for electronic dance music that techno could tap into. You might be thinking, hey, there was electronic music in Europe before that, and you would be right. You also might be thinking that a lot of early Detroit techno sounded a lot like Parliament mixed with Kraftwerk, and you would also be right. But Kraftwerk wasn't a solitary phenomenon. From this New York Times article, quote, Europe was incubating its own nascent electronic dance music scene in the 1970s and 80s. Microgenres started sprouting as musical pollen spread across the continent. New beat, synth pop, and electronic body music, or EBM. One of the things I think is most interesting about techno is its diversity in sound. And as we saw the rise of regional techno scenes in Europe in the early 1990s, so did we start to get regional styles of the music. In the northern UK, bleep techno was developing. Widely considered the first bleep techno single is Unique 3's The Theme, released in 1988. The Theme opened the floodgates to a slew of new producers of the sound, eventually leading to the formation of the now hugely prolific and respected Warp Records in 1989.
I'm here to tell you about Warp. New, improved Warp. Just like the old Warp. Only more so.
If you want a perfect time capsule of bleep techno of that time, check out the Warp compilation Warp 10+2 Classics 89 to 92, released in 1999. Meanwhile, Germany was putting its own spin on the genre. Trance or hard techno is described as having faster tempos between 140 and 160 BPM and aggressive whooshing beat patterns, heavy compression, and straightforward strong structures. Listening to the tracks on 1999's release The Real Trance by German producer and DJ Chris Liebing, you can hear far more industrial and minimal influences with whooshing, crunching, driving percussion over unrelenting kicks and throbbing bass. In part 2 of The Real Trance, the atonal percussion assault is replaced by an atonal acidic synth line on repeat to the point of hypnotism. This music would destroy you on a huge sound system. As an aside, while I believe techno as a genre and term should be attributed to the people of Detroit, it was also a term used in Germany even before some of the major Detroit releases. According to Wikipedia, in 1982, while working at Frankfurt's City Music Record Store, DJ Tala 2XLC started using the term techno to categorize artists such as Depeche Mode, Front 242, Heaven 17, Kraftwerk, and New Order, with the word used as shorthand for technologically created dance music. When you listen to Cybotron's seminal album Enter, you can hear so much more than the industrial pulse of trance. You can hear funk, guitar solos, Prince, Parliament, Gary Newman, and so much more. It was a condensation of genres into a new form that later refined itself into leaner, more abstract electronic forms. Hey, editing Jeremy here. If I had to pick an artist today putting out albums that hit in the same way as those early Detroit techno albums, I'd probably be looking at Matthew Deere, whose work is always forward-thinking while also coming across as like a box of crayons melted together with like LSD sprinkled on top. It's good shit. Germany experienced a huge rise in club and rave culture during the 80s and 90s. Clubs inspired by the Chicago sound bumped acid house across the city and paved the way for techno to take root. In Munich around this time, the Negerhalle and the ETA Halle established themselves as the first acid house clubs and temporarily used dilapidated industrial halls, marking the beginning of the so-called hall culture in Germany. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 opened up East Berlin to underground techno parties. It was also the first year for Berlin's now infamous Love Parade. Paul van Dyk once said that techno was the first area of social life in Germany as a whole in which reunification took place. It was during the 90s that Germany saw some of the most influential clubs in the history of electronic music open. Tresor in 1991 is the only one still open today, but others include The Planet, The Bunker, and E-Work. Berghain, infamous in part for its door staff's selection process, opened in 2004 and still throws parties that can last for days. German producers started increasing the tempo and aggressiveness of the Detroit sound, developing their styles which went on to create other important genres of their own, like hardcore and trance. In the early 1990s, there was a split between the Frankfurt techno crews and Berlin techno crews as to what the genre even was anymore. Producers and DJs in Frankfurt asserted that techno had already existed in Germany and had roots in groups like DAF, Cabaret Voltaire, and Suicide, while Berlin techno learned less about EBM acts and more about acid house and what it mutated into under the club scene there. Listening to a track like Cabaret Voltaire's Sensoria from 1984, you can hear much more of a kinship with tracks from Cybertron's Enter than you can with the Schrons of Chris Liebing. But that's the magic of techno. As the times and politics change, so does the music. One great example of differing 1990 styles of techno that were influencing regional techno subgenres in Europe are these two tracks by Joey Beltram and Jeff Mills. Joey Beltram's Energy Flash, with its slower tempos, throbbing low-end, acid-drenched stabs, and moaning vocal screams Summer of Love Berlin to me. Jeff Mills' The Bells, on the other hand, drives forward at a faster tempo with a distorted kick, stripped-back arrangement, almost atonal chord stabs, and a repeating structure reliant on contrast in timbre as opposed to any sort of harmonic diversity. The latter baffled me when I first heard it on headphones, and it didn't make sense until I felt it at a club. This music is meant to be felt. It's meant to vibrate every cell of your body. Other styles were percolating, no pun intended, across Europe. Belgium was developing a subgenre of abrasive hardcore and the neuro style of techno. Belgians take blended new beat, EBM, and techno into what's been described as apocalyptic, almost Wagnerian bombastic techno, due to its use of dramatic orchestral stabs and menacing synth tones that set it apart from earlier forms of electronic dance music. T99's Anesthesia, released in 1991, has all the hallmarks of what we would associate with cheesy radio play dance artists like CNC Music Factory, but way before it hit the airwaves in the US. Frank DeWolf's reforced mixes show clear EBM influences with a dark repetitive beat and what's becoming a hallmark of early techno, almost atonal acid riffs. Setup System's Fairy Dust gives classic Belgium screech with what sounds like a thorough abused portamento riff and Carnival Nightmare orchestral bits. In the background of this track, you can hear the beginnings of hardcore, which gave way to jungle and then drum and bass. In case it's not clear, techno is one of the mother genres. During the 90s, Berlin's Love Parade became a yearly pilgrimage for people from across the world and helped mint DJ superstars like Richie Houghton, Sven Vath, and Carl Cox. Founded in 1989, the same year the wall fell, the event cemented Berlin as the techno capital of the world, in my opinion. It was originally conceived as a political demonstration for peace, but rapidly grew into a massive, internationally renowned electronic dance festival, attracting over 1 million attendees by 1997. Sadly, overcrowding became a serious issue, and in 2010, a crowd crush occurred that resulted in 21 deaths and 500 injuries. This tragic event led to the event being shut down for good. Alright, so now that we're in the 2000s, we can finally catch up with my first interactions with techno and how it totally rewired my brain in terms of thinking about what music can be. I didn't know it until researching this video, but I had already consumed a fair amount of techno and techno-adjacent music before discovering minimal techno during the 2000s in San Francisco. As we've seen so far, techno has worn so many faces that it's almost impossible, as a fan of electronic music, to not like at least one of its subgenres, or feel its influence on every other subgenre. It wasn't until I discovered minimal that I could really say without a doubt that I love techno, but it still baffled me until I felt it in the clubs of San Francisco. My partner at the time was an old-school raver. He had lived in Berlin during the years the Love Parade was still happening and had a huge collection of classic techno and trance vinyls he would spin at parties. He introduced me to Richie Houghton's music, first through his 2000 release DE9, Closer to the Edit, and then later DE9 Transitions. The DE9 series was Houghton's version of a DJ mix, but to call them that was a disservice. They were continuous mixes that deconstructed the original tracks down to their quanta and rebuilt them with like 5 or 6 other tracks at the same time into something completely new. And oh my god, they were unlike anything I had ever heard before. Deep, subtle, weird, hypnotic, fractal, groovy in ways I couldn't possibly begin to understand. And this is coming from somebody that was into psytrance before that. This was music that, under the influence, built entire worlds for you to live in. The music felt so small in so many ways, but on the right sound system, you lived in it. It was smart, it was fascinating, and I loved it so much. We would spend nights at the End Up, 1015 Folsom, Temple, Public Works, and whatever shitty hole in the wall had a sound system and a good DJ, and soak in this stuff. I realized that these tiny sounds had a huge impact on the dance floor, and it led me to discover the world of minimal techno and its adjacent artists. Shout out to Claude Von Stroke, the Mothership crew, and all the DJs from the original Control crew. Let's put on Robert Hood's Minimal Nation and take a quick dive into the genre. The two artists who are often credited for pioneering this style in the 90s are Robert Hood and Daniel Bell. Both artists are from Detroit, and it's interesting because you can hear the influences of original Detroit techno in these tracks, while the rest of the techno world was pushing towards harder and harder genres like gabber. They wanted to bring the groove back into the tracks, stripping them down to their bare essentials. In Germany, labels such as Compact in Cologne, Richie Houghton's Emnus, and Ellen Alien's B-Pitch in Berlin were championing the minimal sound. I lived and breathed everything coming from Compact in the 2000s, and if you're looking for an amazing collection of listening, check out the Compact Total compilations from that time. Other hugely influential artists in minimal are Ricardo Villalobos, who is still going strong with a fantastic mix of minimal, house, and classic techno, Dubfire, whose remixes and originals were always absolutely insanely good, Basic Channel, Ellen Alien, Stephen Bodson, Surgeon, and Wolfgang Voigt. I still have my original mixes up from that time in my life, with some of my favorite artists over on Mixcloud if you're interested, but a quick search for these artists on YouTube will give you tons to listen to. Like with all techno, minimal eventually had to grow out of being an insular genre and incorporate itself with newer styles. With that said, let's take a moment to just list genres of techno you might encounter, where they started, and what they sound like. I can't promise this is a definitive list, but it should be enough to get you started. A lot of these references are going to come from Ishkar's Guide to Electronic Music, which if you haven't checked out, now you know about it, and you are legally obligated to go check it out. Detroit techno. Ari went over this. This is the motherland and origin of techno. So let's take a look at Detroit techno in the last couple of years. Bleep techno, late 1980s in Yorkshire, England. Britain's attempt to make Detroit techno and failing, but in a good way. Acid techno, late 1980s, hailing from Chicago and Detroit.
Baby, rise for love.
Also, check out the absolutely stellar compilation. It's not intelligent and it's not from Detroit, but it's fucking avid. Hard techno or Trance. Early 90s, Germany and Switzerland, eventually everywhere as it became the official music genre of rave culture at the time. Industrial techno, early 1990s, UK. This was the genre I was into before I got into more club-oriented dance music. I will rock the fuck out to this stuff any day of the week.
I told you not to stop. Let's go.
Ambient techno. This is probably, along with dub techno, the most popular genre of techno that I get told is people's favorite when I ask them what kind of techno they're into. This was started in the early 1990s in Detroit and UK and is very diverse and cool. Minimal techno. Started in the early 1990s, Detroit made it as a response to what Europe did to techno, and Berlin was like, yeah, we don't like what Europe did either. This was made as a rejection to big techno.
Take your shirt back off. Yeah. That's right. About to glue together tonight. You know what my thing is, don't you? Yeah. Here you want more? Okay.
Dub techno. Again, along with ambient techno, this is one of most people's favorite types of techno that I've talked to. Early 1990s, probably Berlin. So take minimal techno and add dub. Add bass lines, add minor chord stabs and seventh chord sweeps, and you've got some dub techno. I would like to give a special shout out to Octave One here. There is a live set they did at the 909 Festival in Amsterdam that I recommend to anybody who is trying to figure out how to make live electronic music, because it shows exactly what you would probably want to think about when planning a set. You've got one guy doing all the bleep bloops on the drum machines and synths, and the other guy is at the mixing desk playing with the mix and the effects. And these are the two components that I think make up a good live electronic music set. And oh my God, do these guys bump live. Holy shit. I also want to say that one of my hugely enormous favorite albums that straddles dub techno and minimal techno is Stuart Walker's Live Extracts. It manages groove, melody, and heady depth perfectly, and I used it as the blueprint for my live techno album, Cast in Amber. Banging techno. Mid-1990s, literally everywhere. I grabbed this one from the amazing Ishkar's Guide to Electronic Music, which you should check out for tons of great information about all genres of electronic music. I thought it was important to include, mostly because it seems to be a crossroads for literally every type of techno that exists, with paths to and from Detroit, Sweden, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Latin America. If I had to go out on a limb, I would say that banging techno was because the scene finally went truly international, and this was the inevitable result of a kind of cross-pollination. It's not just the geography that expanded and paved the way to an international scene, it's the sounds themselves that lay the groundwork for what techno would become in the mainstream. Peak time techno, early to mid 2000s, still going strong today. The rise of drop-based music and EDM festival schlock and awe affected every genre, and techno is no exception, but it's not all bad. These tracks combine the slippiness of techno with an undeniable energy of build and drops. Again, this isn't an exhaustive list or even a comprehensive one depending on how well versed you are with the genre. I was honestly overwhelmed a bit doing research for this video because once techno left Detroit and hit Europe, it was like walking into the shimmer and annihilation. The genre mutated and refracted so quickly and thoroughly it was almost impossible to pin down. Also, by going through and listening to like my old playlists and mixes and stuff like that, I realized there are so many artists that I don't really have a place for in this history thing, but are still like hugely important to me. Artists like Gregor Trescher, Mode Selector, iMusic, Booker Shade, Oliver Huntman, Superflu, Cobblestone Jazz, Jan Driver, Solomon Stimming, Troy Pierce, John Geyser, and that's not even like how many I'd like to tell you about. With that said, what does techno look like now in the 2020s? 2023 saw a mix of old heads like Carl Cox and Adam Beyer still dominating the charts, alongside newer artists like Belgium's Charlotte de Witt and Amelie Lenz, Siberia's Nina Kravitz, UK's Blawan, and Italy's Deborah De Luca. The playing field is diverse sonically. Adam Beyer is putting out what I consider a very classic Beyer style of main room, drop-based, almost progressive techno with tracks like Legend and Desert Queen. Amelie Lenz's storming, stab-heavy offerings remind me of old-school Belgium trance. Charlotte de Witt's sound pulls peak-time evolution with her tracks, pulling from acid old-school bleep, trance, and Belgium techno. I love the darker, more minimal side of Nina Kravitz with her tracks like Hace er Ciclos. Boris Brejcha's stuff is complex, techie, dark, and funky, and one of my favorites of the whole bunch. Blawan is killing it with more experimental, noisy, forward-thinking tracks that straddle the line between cerebral and devastating on the dance floor. Daniel Avery's Drone Logic and On couldn't be very much more different from each other, the former being an acid-soaked throb monster. The top 10 of Beatport's raw, deep, hypnotic techno right now features Minimal Stormer Endless Love with its dope vocals and a huge cocoon of a drop.
Above and underground, let me break it down to you.
Tweaky, almost housey, Manic Room with a 2-beat locked groove that makes my stank face twitch. There's Steady by Markall with a deep hypnotic feel like you're lost in the jungle on every variation of a hallucinatory drug that's ever existed. Tweaky, destructive and menacing, Tide by Altenboss ramps up tension. While Woo York's Atlantis gives us extremely chill acid grooves bordering on ambient techno. My impression of techno in 2024 is that the entirety of its history is there for you as a producer and as a listener. You can mix and match whatever you want, and you should, especially if you're making this kind of music. Techno has proven itself powerful enough to stand the test of time, mutate when it wants, and then still come out of the other side as relevant as it was before. It can be weird, it can be emotional, and it can rip your face off. I came into this video with a little bit of knowledge about a genre I only knew one facet of, and came away with so much more respect and inspiration than I ever expected. I want you to feel the same. If you're a producer trying to find your voice, please just do what you want. Push deep into what makes you unique and stop asking if it's the right thing to do or if people will like it or not. 3 Kids in Detroit did something nobody had done before and changed the world, and so many of the producers and DJs in this documentary did the same. Thank you, Techno, for what you've taught me and for how you've brought the world together in ways that we never could have imagined. From the ashes of Motor City to the fall of the Berlin Wall, from millions upon millions of people together at Love Parade to 20 together in a dark basement somewhere having the night of their lives. From the warehouses of Berlin to the main stages of Tomorrowland, the pulse of Detroit techno continues to drive the sound of dance music culture worldwide. Techno's raw, underground spirit and quest for the future sounds will continue to influence and inspire generations of artists to come. Hey all, thank you for watching to the end, if indeed you still are. I want to give a shout out to my patrons. This is the kind of video that literally without them, I would not be able to do. The amount of research and time that went into this video was a lot. Probably my most researched and time-consuming video. Speaking of research, as with all my videos that have like sources, check out the video description for a link to the transcript from this video and all of my sources that I have compiled so that you can read through this if you want and find links to all the sources so you can read more and learn more on your own. This was both a nostalgic trip for me, but also one that has gotten me invigorated into diving into music again. That's exactly what I wanted for you too. So I hope that you have a great time discovering techno. Thank you for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next video. My name is Jeremy. This is Red Means Recording, and I hope you have a wonderful day.